Well, despite some stabilization in home building and home sales, Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies finds that the housing downturn continues and it is still facing an uphill climb. For more on its annual State of the Nation's Housing Report, Eric Belsky is the executive director of the center. Joins us now from New York City. The center is one of the country's leading institutions for information and research on housing markets and trends. It's been publishing these annual reports for more than 2 decades. And Eric, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. And some people have suggested housing may be bottoming, even starting to turn up, and your study challenges that notion?
Yeah, I think what you're seeing right now is signs of potentially a stabilization, perhaps a floor forming underneath the housing markets, but there are a number of very stiff headwinds that the market's facing, including obviously ongoing job losses, very, very heavy levels of foreclosures that don't seem to have peaked yet, and a number of other factors that just make it difficult for many home buyers to break into the market, including return of down payment constraints, challenges getting credit if you've had past problems making your payments.
And let me ask you, Eric, about the state of the federal efforts to try and help Americans deal with this situation. We've seen so many federal initiatives introduced here in Washington. Not all of them have totally taken shape. Do you get any sense they're gaining traction?
Well, that's right, Peter. There have been a number of bold actions taken, and certainly some of them are beginning to show signs of traction. But, take, for example, the effort to modify literally millions of homeowners' loans to try to make them more affordable, bring them down to about 31% of their income. That's starting to take effect, but it's quite slow, and there's still a concern that it will not be able to be ramped up because it depends on a lot of other parties taking actions that the federal government would like to see them take, but it's not clear they will take. Then there's a number of actions to keep mortgage interest rates low that have been engaged in by Treasury and the Federal Reserve, but even those are starting to show some stress. As you know, interest rates headed higher again over the last month, and that's very important to the recovery. So while the federal government's doing a whole host of things, there are only a couple of them, they haven't taken firm enough hold to really lift the housing market out in a significant way. You may see some small increases, but what we're really looking for is something to really stimulate demand, and in this environment, it's very challenging.
Eric, let me ask you about that rise in interest rates and mortgage rates. To what extent does that threaten the housing recovery right now?
Well, I think it's a very serious threat. I think part of the reason you've seen some life in the housing markets has to do really with 2 factors. One is the really deep discounts on homes, and you're seeing that in foreclosure sales especially, which, according to the National Association of Realtors, is upwards of 1/3 of all sales, plus people selling homes short, in other words, selling them below the value of their homes. The other big one is interest rates, which lets people be able to afford housing and gives them a sense of urgency when they see rates falling to low levels. When they start backing back up, you get people jumping into the market again, worried that they might miss out. But if rates continue to climb in this way, it's going to cut off a very important stimulus to demand. And then there's the tax credit, which the federal government put in place, which is very important for first-time buyers. It doesn't cover all buyers by any stretch of the imagination when they're just first-time buyers, and that'll be expiring at the end of the year. So it's a very fragile state right now, and interest rates are quite important.
Eric, are there any indication that certain pockets of the country that have been hard hit might be starting to show improvement? Are you all tracking anything geographically?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And clearly, some of the markets that got hit hardest are showing the worst foreclosures increasing, or in places like Florida, Arizona, California, some of the places you might expect. But at the same time, with foreclosure sales so high there, it is stimulating demand. Existing home sales have been up significantly for an extended period of time in some of those markets. So they're showing some life. And in California, where there's also a state tax credit, they're finding that there's an even larger increase in demand, but it's still at very low levels compared to where it was, and there's still a lot of downside risks, as I suggested.
And Eric, you suggest in this report that it's echo boomers who are going to lead the nation out of this housing recession?
That's right, Peter. One of the bright signs in the report, and obviously a very difficult environment, is to look further ahead. And we look at the demographic underpinnings of demand, and the echo baby boomer is actually the largest generation to ever reach adulthood in the United States, young adulthood. And that's the prime household forming years where people start to actually rent and own homes. And that generation coming into this period is 5 million more strong than the baby boom generation, which drove housing demand for so long, was when they were at similar ages when they started coming to the housing market.
All right. Eric Belsky, he's Executive Director of the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard University. Eric, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.